Welcome to Resilience Development in Action, where strength meets strategy and courage to help you move forward. Each week, your host, Steve Bisson, a therapist with over 2 decades of experience in the first responder community, brings you powerful conversations about resilience, growth, and healing through trauma and grief. Through authentic interviews, expert discussions, and real-world experiences, we dive deep into the heart of human resilience. We explore crucial topics like trauma recovery, grief processing, stress management, and emotional well-being. This is Resilience Development in Action with Steve Bisson.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 212. If you haven't listened to episode 211, it's with Gordon Brewer. Gordon is, came back. We talked about grief. He used to run a funeral home. He talked about that. He talked about the stress the first responders face, the trauma that they see, among many other things. So I hope you go listen to it then. But for episode 212, we are going to be talking to Lee Povey. Lee Povey is a high-performance leadership coach specializing in working with founders and startups. He's a lifelong entrepreneur, former elite cycling person. He also does a lot of help with high achievers and helps them motivate, lead, and give them feedback. And as a podcast guest, he wants to be able to use his Olympic sport experience and the business world to discuss how to find more joy and success, particularly with groups. And I'm hoping that we talk about men's groups particularly. So here is the interview. GetFree.ai. You heard me talk about it. I'm going to keep on talking about it because I love it. I've had about a year and a half, 18 months practice with it, and I still enjoy it. And it saves me time and it saves me energy. Free.ai takes your note, makes what you're talking with a client, just press record. And it does either transcript, it does a subjective and an objective with a letter if needed for your client and for whoever might need it. So for $99 a month, it saves me so much time that it's worthwhile. And if you do it for a whole year, guess what? You get 10% off. More importantly, this is what you got to remember, because you are my audience that listens to Resilience Development in Action. If you do listen to this and you want to use free.ai, put in the code STEVE50 in the promo code area, STEVE50, and you will get $50 off in addition to everything we just talked about. Get freed from writing your notes. Get freed from even writing your transcripts. Use that to your advantage. Free.ai, a great service. Go to getfree.ai and you will get one of the best services that will save you time and money. And I highly encourage you to do so. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 212. Before we start, I want to give this tribute to one of my fallen colleagues who was a parole officer, and I worked with him for several years. He passed away on Sunday, June 30th, 2025. Joe Connor, this episode's for you. Rest in peace, brother. Miss you. We'll always miss you, and God bless. Having said that, let's get back to the show on the road here. I'm happy to really introduce someone that we just had a 23 I never have these long pre-interviews. We just talked and talked. And I'm like, probably should press record at this point, because it was such a common conversation of how men's group can help, how empathy can help, and how being able to not be siloed really helps us see other people's point of view in a different light. And it had to be the Commonwealth working on this. But Lee Povey, welcome to Resilience Development in Action.
Thank you, Steve. Lovely to be here with you, and sorry for your loss.
Thank you. It's you without going too long on him, a guy who was really doubting the help that mental health and substance abuse can do for his guys, saw the good in me and never gave up and became a big proponent. You cannot replace a guy like that. You just can't. So, and he was fairly young too, which is unfortunate also. Died of cancer. So thank you. But Lee, I got to know you very well. And truthfully to our audience, I have a project going with him probably in the next few months or years. That's how excited I am for you guys to get to know Lee. But Lee, how about you tell people about yourself a little bit so that way they know who they're listening to?
Yeah. Where would you like me to start, Steve? There's a bit of story here.
Well, for me, I think that who you are as a human being is key to think about, where you come from, what you're doing now, and what you hope to accomplish until, we all become dust.
Yeah. Okay. Product of a narcissistic sociopathic father.
Okay.
And, I don't say that like the trendy TikTok kids. He really was.
Yeah.
This was clinically diagnosable behavior, did not care about anybody but himself, saw me and the rest of his children as an extension of himself. He would talk about me winning races as, his good sperm and stuff like that,
Mm.
and wouldn't actually ever say well done to me. He would just talk about me to other people as an extension of himself and how to kind of inflate his own ego. So at a fairly young age, I was smart. So I figured out pretty young that I didn't want to be like him, but I didn't really know what I wanted to be like and who I wanted to be. And I had a very strong vision of right and wrong, but I didn't really know what it meant to be a man. And even now, I'm 52 years old and I'm still trying to figure that out. And I find that question really interesting when people say, "What's a man?" I'm like, well, I don't really know. And people have these root answers of, oh, it's this, or it's provider, or it's a protector. And I look at the guys that turn up in my men's group, and they're all so different, and it's all valid. And I think we'll get to that in a moment.
Yeah.
So anyway, I had this childhood experience that was difficult, and luckily I had a very loving mother that helped me and guided me. And as we were saying just before the show started, recently moved in with me, which is wonderful. And it kind of set me up with a lot of love, but I was struggling to connect with men, know how to connect with men, and have the relationships that I wanted with men, especially. This journey led me to a therapist who was wonderful. I got incredibly lucky. The first therapist I worked with was a genius and just an awesome human being. And he led me to men's groups. He was in men's groups himself. He was a leader of the local group. And he led me to men's groups. And I got, again, very lucky that the first men's group I joined, there was a lot of older, wiser men. I was the youngest guy in it. I was in my early 20s at this time. And even though I'm a natural leader and became a natural leader of the group and kind of pushed the dynamics of the group, because that's the annoying person that I am, I had this wonderful experience of older men loving me, seeing me, allowing me to develop and share of myself, and giving me the feedback that I wanted and needed to hear and needed to develop the ability to hear. While this was going on, I was an elite athlete. I realized I wasn't going to be an Olympian. I just didn't quite have that level of talent. I'm a good national level rider, but I'm not going to go win a gold medal at Olympics. And at that time in the UK, there was very little funding in my sport, track sprint cycling, so it wasn't a viable career. Now it is, even if you're not quite going to be Olympic champion, it's a career path that wasn't open to me. Family was poor. So I did what many young people do who are smart but don't have a great education. And we can maybe talk about that sometime. I'm autistic and dyslexic, which made school challenging for me. They didn't know this stuff. I've only discovered both of those things fairly recently. But it makes a ton of sense why I was either the smartest person in the room or I couldn't learn. And the way that they were teaching me just didn't work for me. So I went into real estate. I did 12 years in real estate, 6 years with a large corporate company, which is actually a good experience for me. And I learned a ton, and I luckily had some good leaders whose impact I still feel now as a leadership coach. And then I had my own company and had to learn a lot about how to lead and develop and build. And I started that pretty young. This was still in my mid-20s. I started my own company. Eventually, I sold that company just before the property crash in 2008. I could see it coming, and I still got lucky. And I moved into cycling coaching. And I was coaching young athletes part-time for fun, and I turned it into a profession. I ended up becoming the national team coach for USA Cycling's Olympic Development Program, which was a pathway program to the LA 2028 Games. And I loved that work so much. However, I knew there was something bigger. I'm only working with like 10 to 12 athletes at a time, and I felt a calling to have more impact than that. I needed to have more impact. And then COVID came, that program got shut down during COVID, and I'm sitting there going, what's next? I heard a podcast from a leadership coach, didn't even know that existed. I thought sometime I might be a consultant from all of my entrepreneurial work. But I didn't know leadership coaching existed. And I listened to this podcast, shared it with my wife. My wife's a psychotherapist. We have a private psychotherapy practice as
My
well.
deepest sympathies.
You're welcome. I said in my wedding vows to everybody, no, I'm not her project. And I had this moment of realization. This is it. This is what my life has been built into. It's this kind of emotional coaching. And then I just needed to find my niche. And my niche is working with men in groups and working with scale up companies on their leadership and working with their executive teams and helping them all be more connected and work better with each other. And that's how we've ended up where I am today.
Well, there's so many things you said that I want to go for. The wife therapist thing, I get it. When I started dating after my divorce, I had someone who basically said, well, you're a therapist, help my family. I'm like, ooh, that's no. So when in my profiles, it said, I'm a therapist, but I am not your therapist.
Yeah.
And my girlfriend still to this day jokes around that one. So I figured you'd like that story. You mentioned something that maybe we can jump off that I really, really enjoyed is that you joined a men's group, which is, one of my questions I had is if you've ever been in the men's group. So that answers that. And you said they gave you feedback you needed.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that a good group will give you feedback you didn't want to hear, but you needed. I think that there's a distinction between the two because sometimes we want to be validated, but sometimes we have a bunch of group that guys will go like, don't fucking shovel me bullshit and tell me that this is the greatest thing in the world. And I think that that's a little bit of like that dynamic that I wanted to maybe address with you a little more. Sometimes the feedback is needed. Sometimes it's not wanted, but it's received. So how do you navigate all that? Because I know that I run a group for first responders. I've actually run 2 groups for first responders. And that's the greatest thing in the world when guys go bullshit. And to me, that's like the dynamic that it creates and within the group is amazing. But anyway, I wanted to hear your point of view on that.
Yeah. As a human being, one of my gifts is I can see the stuff that you can't see about yourself. I've always had that gift from a young man, and I've wielded that gift clumsily and sometimes spitefully.
Thank you, Dad.
And yeah, absolutely. And as I've got older, I've realized that's not effective. And even sometimes it's, when I wielded it clumsily, there was good heart there. I'd go up to an athlete at a velodrome and say, hey, why are you doing it like this? Why don't you do it like that? Instead, you'll be faster. I had no rapport. The messaging was poor. I hadn't built any trust and safety, and I'm just telling them they're wrong. So they're leaving the exchange just feeling lesser than, and I've had no impact because they haven't actually absorbed the wisdom that I've got to share with them. And I was sharing something relevant. This is the better way of doing it. My athletes were super successful, broke hundreds of national and world records. So I'm giving you good advice, but the way I delivered it was so poor. And I've had to study how to deliver feedback to the point now that I'm known as a world expert on delivering feedback, and I run workshops on delivering feedback because I was so poor at it, Steve. So being able to see doesn't mean that you can actually teach, and it doesn't mean that you can share in a way that's impactful. So I've had to learn that. And that's what people come to me for now. They come to me for the stuff they can't see, or that others are afraid to tell them, or don't have the skill set to tell them in a way that's impactful. So let's tie that to groups. There is a way that you can create safety and trust and belief that that person is giving me loving feedback, so that even if the feedback stings a bit and you're like, oh, I feel very seen right now. Oh, that hurts. That's the part of my personality I don't like, and you're reflecting it to me. Oof, that hurts. That you can sit there with it and go, thank you. I needed that. Some of the work that I've done with coaches, with myself, and I do with my clients, and I do in my men's groups, is this shadow work where we talk about what are your genetic personality traits. So we start with what is it that you bring to the world? And we're all different, and we have different genetic personality traits. Anyone who's a parent knows this. Your children are different, same genetic matter, like same mum and dad, yet they have developed they're born with different skill sets, they're born with different personality traits, and then the world meets them. You might be a super curious kid, and there's lots of ways the world can meet that. The world can be like, you're too much, shut up. So you dim that light, and it becomes a burden rather than a gift. Or the world might meet you and say, that's wonderful. tell me more, or ask me more questions, or here's how you learn. That person's the person who goes on and goes and invents a bunch of things. The other person's is somebody who ends up being depressed and they're not allowed to share that gift. So my gift is I'm very, very smart and perceptive. However, I would use that to control people to be safe. That's how I kept myself safe from my dad. It's also linked to my autism, where I need certain physical safety, I need certain sensory safety. So one of my shadows is tyrannical Einstein. That's what me and my coaches
Mm.
came up with a name for it. And it's I use my intelligence, the Einstein part, and Einstein's also well known as a very loving man, which I am. So it's kind of connected to that. But there's a tyrant part that goes with it to control people, to get what I want, to push people into areas that I want them
Well, one of us would call that intellectualization, but that might be my Freudian side. Um,
in.
but there's so many things. I like this is awesome because you talk about delivering feedback. You know, one of my all-time favorite sayings is from Brene Brown. And Brene Brown says, honesty without tact is cruelty. And
Absolutely.
and Brene is one of my favorite people in the world. I never met her. I hope I do one day. But I tell people that, they like, oh, you deliver honesty, but you're not mean. I'm like, yeah, because I use tact. I mean, and I also match you. So if you need a little more direct, you're direct. If you need a little more flowery, you're flowery. I'm not much of a flower, but I'll do it. And I think that that's what I talk about when you talk about delivering feedback. And I don't know what your thoughts on that are. But before we go to that, there's so many things you mentioned too. Um, the curiosity factor for kids to adults to how you grow in your career. And what I tell people is, like what I liked about my best first responders who continue to grow in their career, they're the ones who keep on being curious about learning different things. As a therapist, what I've learned to say is, what I know fits in a thimble. It's about this big. I mean, it's as big as the world. So this is how much I know. And therefore, I want to learn from everyone. And I think that being able to be curious throughout your life shows a side of not only do you become a good leader, you become a good human being. And I know pre interview, we were talking about being good human beings first and foremost as an important factor in life. But I don't know where you want to go with what I just said, but that's definitely like my Brene Brown thing has always been one of my favorite sayings to tell people.
Yeah. And, part of it for me was to feel safe, I needed to feel smarter than you.
Hmm.
I think because of I don't think it's related to stuff with my dad. I think it's just related to my autism and dyslexia that
Okay.
there were moments where learning was very difficult for me and I knew I was smart, but I couldn't always display it. And because of that, I think I took on this belief that I had to always show you how smart I am. And therefore, I'm going to point out the things that you can't see about yourself, that you don't understand, because, hey, that puts me in a one-up position. And Terry Reals, the therapist, talks about this a lot, about the one-up, one-down position. And I used to
Yes.
get a lot from that. And I crashed
Can
in
you can you
2010.
explain that a little bit for people who
Yeah,
may
so
not know
yeah,
what it is?
so there's various models for it. The drama triangle is a good model for it, where you've got the hero position and the victim position. The hero is one up and the victim is one down. So you make yourself feel okay by I am better than you. Then you've got TA today, the transactional analysis version as well. We got parent, adult, child. So you take a parent position and force somebody else to be a child instead of two adults facing each other in equal relationships. And I realized that I was creating these relationships where I was the hero because it made me feel wanted, it made me feel smart. And then I was attracting people that wanted to be rescued. And I crashed in 2010 and broke my shoulder very badly. And it was the first time in my life where I was truly vulnerable. I'd had vulnerable moments before, breakups and things like that, but it hadn't made me really face myself on my own vulnerability in that way. So I had this crash. My arm was really badly damaged. And I didn't know if it was going to work properly again. I ended up having to have two reconstructive surgeries before it did. And it was one of the lowest periods of my life and also one of the best when I reflect back now because of what it taught me. And what it taught me was I was terrible about asking for help. I wanted to be always okay and I wanted you to be not okay so I could save you. And that made me feel secure. And I had this realization that that was not serving me at all. The woman I was dating at the time, we'd been together 4 years. Within 2 months, we were split up because I was like, oh, our relationship only works when I'm the hero and she's vulnerable. When I'm vulnerable, it doesn't work. She doesn't know what to do with it. She doesn't know how to meet me there. And I don't blame her for this at all. I'd created that.
Right.
So I left that relationship and I had to renegotiate a bunch of friendships. I asked one of my friends to take me to the hospital. And he said, well, just get a cab. It's a mile away. And I was like, oh, okay. What I didn't realize is what I was actually asking was, I need you to come and hold my hand because I'm really bloody scared. I've never had an operation before. I'd crashed a bunch of times and got patched up by my local doctor. I'd never had to have an operation, never had an anesthetic. And I was scared, the most scared I'd been in my life. And I didn't even really know how to say that at that point. Like, oh my God, I'm really scared. But I'm sitting in the hospital room, absolutely petrified. And that's when it hit me. I need to be able to tell people that. I need to be able to ask for support, even if it's just someone to hold my hand. So the second operation, I had 5 of my friends come with me. And I didn't even really need that many friends, but they just saw me and I asked for it. And it was a wonderful experience for me to be held by other people instead of it always being the other way around. And it taught me as well that there's so much strength in vulnerability. There's so much connection in sharing, and it improved all of my friendships. And some friendships ended because that person didn't want to meet me equally. They wanted me to rescue them. And it was like, oh, this relationship doesn't work for me anymore. And the way I dated changed. I was single for 4 years after that as I figured myself out on what I needed and how I needed to be met before I met my wife, who's a therapist. And there is a reason that I'm dating someone who's married to a therapist. So it was just this massive pivotal moment that has helped me hugely in my career as well.
I need to isolate that little audio and send it to my girlfriend. It's what I tell her all the time anyway. But no, I think that, what I found was interesting is that also when, people in the helper world, again, I go back to my first responders all the time because this is what the podcast is about, what I do for a living, but also even for me as a therapist. You talk about that differential. I never heard the triangulation that you just talked about, but it was powerful to me because what I love about my job is I don't have to ask for help. I'm in charge. By the way, this is not 50-year-old Steve talking. This is Steve from 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It put me in that position. I love that position.
Yeah.
And the more I grew, the more I realized that asking for help is not a sign of vulnerability or weakness. And again, I go to my first responders. There's a lot of guys who call me, say, oh, yeah, I'll come in for therapy. And they never do because they're so fucking afraid of what that vulnerability entails.
Yeah.
And I think that you talk about not knowing what to say and how to ask for help. Do you have any ideas or suggestions for people to learn to do that? Because you crashed and you had to have surgery. I was scared shitless when I had to get sinus surgery. And people are like, it's just sinus surgery. Okay, I've never been under anesthetics.
Yeah.
To me, I'm afraid I'm not waking up. Turns
Yeah.
out, by the way,
Same here.
just to share the story with everyone, including you, you'll find this funny. So apparently, when I woke up, I was combative. So apparently, they need to now give me something if I wake up in order to not be combative. So apparently, I was fine. But the point is like I think that vulnerability has a lot to do with not asking for help and keeping that power differential. You talked about, I call it power differential. I think we have the same language. You just use different words.
Yep.
How do we, I don't know if convince is the right word. How do we talk to someone who's like, well, I need the help, but I'm not going to come? And for me, I'm a harasser. If you talk about the men's group, I talk about my first responder. I go, hey, where were you? Are you okay? And some people find that harassing and eventually they get what I'm doing. But how do we get people over that stuff? Because I think it's so important that vulnerability, to me, if you ever make fun of my vulnerability, you're the asshole, not me. That's how I perceive it. But I know some people
Yeah.
struggle with that. So
Yeah.
I'm a little more rough than you are. So I want to hear how you would say it.
Oh, I can be rough. Don't worry, buddy. I think let's go back one step, which is why men
Okay.
struggle with it. And my understanding from the research, from my own observations, is we struggle with it because young men and boys are taught not to have feelings. What is the worst thing for a young guy? It's to show fear, and fear is part of vulnerability. So we get told from an early age, stuff I would get told in the UK: man up,
Yeah.
don't cry, don't show them you're afraid, right? Be stoic, don't give away, that power of showing you're afraid. Like, it's not giving any power away, but that's what you get told.
Yeah.
And then, you know, especially between men, it's the don't be a pussy, don't be wimp, don't be gay.
Yeah.
You know, so you get the homophobic slurs, you know, for whatever reason, like why men think being feminine or like a woman is somehow weak because they give birth to children. We can't do that. But that's the insult, right, for young guys. And you know, think back to my childhood, it's all about calling each other gay. That was like the biggest insult that you could do to each other, or a pussy or weak. So you have all of this messaging about don't be this thing, which is just a normal part of human experience. You look at little children, boys and girls, and before they get that message in, they have exactly the same emotional range and reaction. So the 6 emotions I like to work with when men come to me, or anyone comes to me, but particularly with men, is fear, joy, anger, sadness, interest, and disgust. And fear and anger are typically the 2 hardest ones for guys to work with because they've been told can't be too angry unless it's about your sports team losing, and you cannot be afraid. Like, there is nothing worse than being afraid. Fear is just a thing. It's data. It tells us about our human experience. It tells us that we need to be prepared for something in the future. That's it. That's what it's telling us. And if we look at these emotions as neither negative nor bad, they are just experiences that tell us about what is going on in the world, we then get to use them and learn from them. And, you know, to now pull this back to your question as to why men struggle to join groups and struggle to be vulnerable, is because they don't know how to sit with their fear, because they've been told fear is something they shouldn't have. And we actually need to learn how to sit with these emotions and let this emotion tell us something. And when you actually sit with fear, like any emotion, it's a fairly fleeting thing. It's a 60, 90-second experience of, oh, I feel really afraid right now. Ah, what's that fear telling me? Oh, it's telling me I'm worried I'm going to be judged by the other guys in this group for what I share. And that is typically the issue with vulnerability is I don't want to be judged by the other people. And for me, men's groups, to be truly successful, you have to remove the judgment. You have to go there and it has to be a judgment-free space. And this is where that balance of being able to give feedback is developed and becomes a real skill, because to begin with, I don't allow any feedback from the other guys. It's just come here, be heard, and get used to being heard by other guys who don't want you to change, who don't need you to be different. They just need you to be you. And then you get to the point where you're like, give me some feedback, guys. And the moment that a guy says, okay, give me some feedback, I'm now ready for it, then they can start to get that support of, right, here's some things that we see that can help you. And one of the things I love to do with groups is we do this round of acknowledgement and then opportunity. So it's okay, this is the great I see in you. This is the impact you're having in the world. And then here's some opportunity that I see for you. And typically how we get that wrong societally is we focus too much on opportunity and not enough on appreciation. And this is very true for the companies that I work with. And I use this cookie jar analogy, if you'll let me just play for a moment. And we're all born with a full cookie jar, right? Lovely full jar of cookies, delicious cookies. And that is like our ability to absorb information, our ability to get feedback. And as we grow, we get more of the observational, critical feedback than we do appreciation and acknowledgement, typically.
Yeah.
And every time that happens, that's something taking a handful of cookies out. And eventually our cookie jar gets empty. We have no capacity to get feedback anymore. And you particularly see this in work organizations. You have that boss that walks in and everyone's like, oh, fuck, what's he going to say now?
Correct.
What's this guy going to say to me now? And that you cannot listen to that person. You can't learn from that person. So in the men's group, we practice on filling the guys' jars back up by letting them process, by letting them speak, by letting them share, by appreciating them before we then say, okay, and here's some stuff that we see for you. And here's this story you're telling yourself, right, Steve? We all have these stories we're telling ourselves. Here's the story you're telling yourself. What's going to happen if you let go of that story? What's the opportunity for you if you let go of this story?
All I can say is I think of Brene Brown when you say that. Again, I do have a cult for her. So
She's a smart lady who says some very wise things.
you talk about the emotions. That's actually we do. You know, I think you're like I'm going to start calling you a brother from another mother. because I do similar work. I talk about the core emotions. I'm sure you've seen a wheel of emotions. That's kind of what you described anyway. And I tell people, like, for men, being happy and being angry is kind of okay. We can do that. But the rest of them, the surprise, the disgust, oh, no, you can't do that, man. That's just not acceptable. And for women, the sadness is okay with a little happiness, but the rest of it, even fear is okay, but not always and not kind of, especially if you have kids. Why would you be fearful? Blah, blah, blah. And what I tell people is we're usurping our emotional system anywhere from 50 to 66% by telling people that this is not okay. And I tell people, if you don't have all those 6 emotions at least once a day, then you are failing yourself as a human being. And fear
Well, you
doesn't
do have them. You have them. We just don't pause to go, what is it I'm feeling right now? First week of my men's group, the homework is, I want you to stop yourself 5 or 6 times a day, 4 deep breaths. What do I feel right now? Actually learn to listen to your human experience.
But I think that that's exactly where I was going, because you talked about humanity.
Mm.
And when you don't have humanity, you don't let yourself have that. You know, I didn't know if I was going to cry when I did that little tribute earlier. And if I did, I couldn't have cared less. And what I mean by that is I'm never going to pretend I don't have emotions. Do I overtake in podcasts? Sure, I can overtake. It's my podcast. If I want to make it about me the whole 60 minutes, who gives a shit? But in my sessions, I also let myself have emotions, but I don't let it take over the session, because that's where you cross those ethics lines, in my opinion. But people, one of the best comments I get every single year, Steve, I love you as a therapist because you are a human being and you let yourself be a human being. And to me, that's another part that we talked about earlier. Talk about, emotions, the acknowledgement, the opportunities. You talked about all this, but acknowledging our humanity. And I think that that's what's been missing for a whole lot of time for a whole lot of people now. And I think that that's where we need to also, in men's group, being able to be human is something that, there's 2 rules in my group. You never talk about what's said outside of this group. You can be in your mind about it, but you never talk about it. And if I ever catch you, there's no explanation. You are out. I don't want to fucking hear it. And number 2, the other one is you do not apologize. There is no apologies in my group. You say what you say, don't apologize. I think I say, we don't say I'm sorry. And sometimes people say, well, I said I apologize. That's different. I'm like, smart ass. But the point is I think that what you've talked about is really reaches all that. And being able to get to that point of expressing yourself is so difficult for so many people because they've been usurped on their emotional and, to me, their central nervous system at a very young age. I think, especially I look at the Generation X and the Generation Zs, and I belong in the Generation X just like you. I think that plays a lot in how you grow up and how it usurps your whole central nervous system. This was so awesome. I need to shut off for episode 212, but the good news is that for episode 215, I'm going to be able to put this one in for the second part. So please join us then.
Please like, subscribe, and follow this podcast on your favorite platform. A glowing review is always helpful. And as a reminder, this podcast is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only. If you're struggling with a mental health or substance abuse issue, please reach out to a professional counselor for consultation. If you are in a mental health crisis, call 988 for assistance. This number is available in the United States and Canada.